So again, I'm going to bring Dr. Haas into the room and let's have a good show.
So hello everyone, I hope you can hear me just fine. Greetings to everyone from Toronto, Canada. You have to love technology in the year 2014. Here I am in Toronto, and I know we have guests from literally all over the world, and this is amazing. So thank you very much for joining me. I do want to thank John and Mindy, who've done a heck of a lot of work in the background. Um, it's been a pleasure working with them, and I'm excited about this thing. I'll give you a quick intro about myself. I'm an endodontist here in Toronto, Canada. I'm in private practice. I graduated from dental school about 17 years ago, and I was a general practitioner long enough to see my mistakes come back, to be honest with you, and to be humbled. And then I went into specialty school, and I graduated about 12 years ago from endodontics. And I have a full-time private practice, but I'm also on staff at the University of Toronto and at a teaching hospital. And I love lecturing and helping colleagues. So this is what tonight is all about. And I do want to also start off by saying that none of the products or items or materials or instruments that I talk about are ones that I have any vested interest in. I have absolutely no vested interest in any of these whatsoever. And so what I say is what I mean. It's what I use, and I'll tell you what I use and why, and what my tips are from my own personal firsthand experience. And the videos and the slides you'll see, they're all from my own use. So without any further ado, let me just start moving along. And like John was saying, any Q&A you may have, certainly feel free to participate, and we'll get to that at the end. So one thing I'd like to start off with saying, and what I start off with saying almost every time I give a lecture nowadays, is this clear trend that there is in endodontics nowadays. And this is something that's really taking place just within the last couple of years. In fact, I go so far as to say that if there's something that you're using nowadays that maybe started using more than 2 years ago, in other words, if you haven't changed your endodontics within the last couple of years, believe it or not, you might be behind the times. And no disrespect to whatever you're using or whatever company is supplying you, even if it happens to be Tulsa, who, by the way, I do want to thank for supporting this. But if there's an instrument or material or a technique that you started using more than 2 years ago, then you really are behind the times. And that's because of this clear trend, which started about 2 years ago in instrumentation and obturation. And that is that nowadays in endodontics, in the year 2014, we require fewer steps to perform our endodontics. Things have become simplified, not worse, but in other words, it's simplified to be able to have the same outcome for biologically, clinically, mechanically. And in doing so, it's more predictable, and also the outcome from the technique is better. The fewer steps you have, the less things can go wrong, the easier it is to follow, so on and so forth. And wave one, which is the file you're seeing right here in this slide, is really what started that trend. And it's really impressive what it has done. And so with that in mind, keep in mind the following. I do want to go into the obturations. And so imagine at this point, we have instrumented our canal, we have medicated it, we have dried the canal, we're ready to obturate. This is what we need to keep in mind right now. On the top of the slide, the two photos you see are carrier-based obturators. The one on the left side is Thermophil from Tulsa. The one on the right side, as an example, is also a plastic carrier-based obturator from Cybron. And then what started war obturation years ago and is still around is the Obtura gun, which you see on the bottom left, which is, imagine a gun, and pardon me if I'm saying things that you already know, but for those that aren't too familiar, it's a gun that injects warm gutta percha into the canal from a stainless steel little needle. And then on the bottom right is the thing that when I started using this, I just fell in love with. And this has changed, to me, everything. And that's the gutta core, which is also carrier-based warm obturation, except it's not plastic-based, it's not metal-based, it's gutta percha in the middle, meaning there's gutta percha in the middle with gutta percha on the outside. Consider it as being ice and water. It's the same material, it just handles differently, but it is all gutta percha. Now, when you're considering these techniques, look at this slide over here. And what you're seeing really is This is the traditional warm vertical obturation. You have this gun injecting gutta percha out of this little needle over here. And then you have this hot instrument that you have to use also to help sear off and pack down the obturation. And then you've got these over here, which are the carrier-based obturators that are plastic carrier-based. And then finally, this little thing on the left side, which looks so harmless and so innocent, is, in my opinion, the most, and I'm not trying to be polite to Tulsa, honestly, to me, it is the most well-engineered, well-produced piece of obturation technique that there is. It is all gutta percha, but when you just look at this entire slide, keep in mind, just what do you think will be the easiest to work with? This thing over here, or this thing, or this tiny little thing? Which one will be the easiest to produce warm obturation into a canal, especially in the posteriors? In those poll questions that you had filled out, and I thank you for that, that was myself asking Tulsa to pull these poll questions, which I came up with, because I'd like to know who the audience is. In many of these poll questions, I noticed that many people were saying that they're using cold lateral or warm vertical, meaning this technique right over here. And then some people saying it would take too long. Well, that's something that is an issue with this and potentially these plastic-based carriers. And it's also an unpredictable sort of an outcome with all this, which all these points in mind really lead me to want to talk more and more about this innocent little well-engineered obturator here on the left side, the gutta core from Tulsa. And so the next thing I want to show you is this little video. And what I want you to keep in mind is the difference in delivery between these systems. So as I play this video, and these two are in sync, you'll see my view on the right side through the microscope, and try and see this is the upper first molar we're obturating. Look at this large obturator and how difficult it is to try and access this molar. Now we have this hot instrument, and keep in mind how over here we have to be very careful not to touch the lower lip and the opposing arch. It's not that tough to gain access, but it's still something to keep in mind. This is a plastic-based carrier over here, but note over here how difficult it is to obturate, especially the mesial canals, because we've got the opposing arch in the way. And the same holds true for this other carrier-based obturator, which is a plastic carrier-based obturator, which was phenomenal for its time, but this was an issue. And this is a big issue for me and for many people, that it's very difficult to gain access, especially in posterior. So don't you wish you can just take this little handle over here and just break it off? Well, guess what? There you go. I just did it. And now imagine this thing as being a paper point that we're just trying to put into these canals in this molar. That's all it is. And I can go from the mesial canals to the distal to the palatal. In other words, accessibility and delivery of this warm obturator is exceptionally simple. So we'll go back to our slide. I want you to keep in mind, this is the year 2014. There's no reason why endo should be that complicated and that difficult, and you should be turned off from doing endodontics just because, as in the poll was mentioned, sometimes it takes too long or it's unpredictable. Well, imagine you have a warm obturator that's plastic-based and everything's ready, canal's instrumented, but now you can't place that tip, that obturator into the canal because you've got the opposing arch. And as much as you ask the patient to open their mouth, they can't open too much. And the problem now is this thing is cooling off. Before you know it, it gets very frustrating. It's taking too long. Now you got to get another core. And so with these things in mind, it led me more and more to love this new obturator that I'll be talking about shortly. Now, in the poll questions, about a third of the people were mentioning that they use warm vertical obturation. So it's interesting that about a third of you use warm vertical obturation. And yet here you are logging after hours onto a webinar talking about a carrier-based obturator, which to me either says you're curious to know what's going on, or you're having too many frustrations, or it's not working out too well. And so for all of you that are not using warm vertical obturation, I'd like to sort of cover that very briefly. Now here on the slide, you'll see one of the more recent instrumentation obturation systems on the market. This is the twisted file adapter from Cybron Endo. And I wanted to include this myself because it is, again, one of the newer systems out there. What I want you to keep in mind is that in this case, it is recommended to use the same, the corresponding gutta percha points to the files that were used, whether it's 04 taper or 06 taper. And I agree with that completely. You know, it's always better when the two, when the instrumentation and the obturation is in sync. But keep in mind, many people do recommend using a narrow taper so as to somehow preserve some dentin. As far as I'm concerned, the difference between an 04, 06, or 08 taper instrumentation, practically speaking, it's not going to make a big difference in terms of structural integrity of the tooth. But the reality is that we need to have a greater taper in order to make your medication easier of the canal, in order to be able to get your lubricant there and to make your obturation much easier. The narrower the taper, as you can see in my hand, the narrower the taper of the canal, the more difficult it is to get in there. The wider the taper, the more easy it is to get your obturation to length. So in this case, if you're using an 04 taper of the instrumentation, obturation with this injection gun over here, for argument's sake, we'll call it, and this hot instrument becomes a little bit more difficult. So what I'd like to do, and as I do very often, is talk to you about traditional warm vertical obturation. And this is something that I'll try and simplify as much as I can, but believe me, it is very technique sensitive, and is perhaps the reason why so many of you tonight are joining me for a webinar on carrier-based obturation. So I'll go through it by step, and whether it's any of these techniques from Cybron or Tulsa, also this the Calamus system from Tulsa Dental. This is to simplify the way to follow this procedure. So once you're instrumented your canal, you're going to go ahead and you're going to take your master cone and you're going to try and fit that master cone to length, maybe about 1/2 millimeter from working length. Make sure you have tug back. Really important to have tug back at the apex, because if you don't, you're going to have a nightmare coming very shortly. Now imagine that cone is fitted and there's tug back, and the tug back has to be apical, not at the middle, not at the coronal. It's got to be apical in the apical third. If that's the case, you can go in there. Now you're going to take your hot tip and you're going to pre-measure this hot tip to about 5 millimeters with this rubber stopper of your working length, because you're going to have to then sear off this gutta percha at about 5 millimeters from length. Now you're going to go in there and you're going to coat the cone with some sealer, place it at length. And at this point, all you want to do, we've just started, all you want to do is sear off this gutta percha around the CEJ, just that then you can start your really warm vertical obturation. However, even though we've just started, this is where time after time I find people having issues with this. And I'll take you to this little video over here, where you see in this radiograph, the gutta percha that I've been fitting in here. And as you'll see in a moment in this video, so I've got my master cone, hopefully with tug back. I'm trying to sear it off with a hot instrument at the CEJ. And what happens very often to many people, and I see it happening to my students, is as we try and sear it off, the whole cone comes out. We've just started this technique. We've barely even started any of the important steps, and already this thing has come out. So now we've got to go back in there, and we've got to try and fit another cone in there. And again, we've got to make sure that there's tug back at the apical part. Otherwise, you can keep repeating this frustrating step. So let's say we went in there, we're able to get our cone in there, we're able to sear it off at the CEJ. Now we have to take our hot instrument and we want to basically try and heat it up all the way to length. And I'll show you in this sort of demo in the live camera. If I'm holding this pen over here, I have to have my finger on this hot instrument and then press it down, hot, 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 hot. I'm going to length. Once I'm at let's say about 5 millimeters from my working length, I take my finger off, which lets this hot instrument cool off. Now I pack it down just a little bit, maybe about 1/2 millimeter. And then to remove it, I have to activate it again. So now it's going to be hot. Turn it maybe 1/4 of the way, bring it out. Hopefully nothing else comes out with it and the rest stays at the apex. And now we'll go back to our video. Thank you, John. Here I am. Now I'm trying to make that step look very simple. Believe me, it's not. Especially if you're not doing that many endos. And I should say from the poll, and again, thank you so much for filling that out, I can see that many of you don't do a ton of endos a week, which is what I would expect from general practitioners. If you're an endodontist and you do tons of endos in a week or in a day, this procedure should be easy just because practice makes perfect. If you're not doing a ton of endos during the week, then all of these steps now become much more complicated. And so let's say now we've seared it off at around the apical 4 or 5 millimeters. We're going to go in with this hot instrument, and now we have to backfill this canal. So we have this injection gun that's going to backfill the canal to the CEJ. Now keep in mind, this gun over here has to make contact with the apical 4 or 5 millimeters of the remaining gutta percha. If it's not, then unfortunately you're going to have a void left behind. Also, if this canal happens to be very curved, then very often my words to you are good luck trying to get it past that curvature of the root. So far we're good. Imagine now we're going in with a plugger. We have to pre-fit this plugger and try and condense it apically, but again, you have to fit the right plugger. If you've come this far, what we do then is we go and we try and coat this canal with a little bit more sealer. Now the next step is we're going to backfill this, again, coronally, with the gun, and you have to make sure that it is making contact with the apical remaining gutta percha. If it's not, then you're going to have a void, and you're not going to be happy with this. Before you know it, you'll be thinking, do I retreat it, do I not? You don't want to have that sort of uncertainty or gut feeling that you're not very comfortable with it. Backfill this canal, and as you're backfilling with this gun, as you're backfilling, you're also pressing apically as it goes coronally. So we continue this, we keep condensing apically, now with a different size plugger, and essentially my point is, just to recap, look at all these steps. And I'm really trying to make it sound simple, and the reality is, unfortunately, it's not. And again, if you're an endodontist, or if you ask your endodontist, well, what do you use, what do you recommend? Most likely this is a technique they'll say. If you ask an endodontist to, including myself, to do an MOD preparation, it'll probably take me 2 hours to do it. It'll take you 5 minutes, it'll take me 2 hours to do. And with that in mind, this whole presentation is really for me to try and make your life more easy, more predictable, with something that, there isn't a huge learning curve. And so back to this technique with this warm vertical obturation, this is what I was talking about. You're going to get voids over here, void, void. You're going to get plugger tracks, unfortunately. And in this case, you can see these are fairly straight canals. Imagine you have a canal which is very curved. This is not even that curved. And already you see void here, void there. Because for all you know, that hot tip of the injection gun, whether it be from this Cybron gun or this Tulsa sort of warm gutta percha gun, it is very difficult to try and get it to go past the curvatures and make contact with the remaining gutta percha in the canal. So that's one way to do it. And the alternative is the following. And quite simply, let me ask you the following. Well, you be the judge. Wouldn't it be easier, faster, and more predictable to do the following? So I'll show you this obturation over here, okay? And here's a maxillary central incisor, which needed root canal treatment. And you look at this anatomy, and this is something that I'm sure all of us should be able to do. And what I'd like to do is sort of lead you to this video. So from that one central incisor, let me show you what it takes to obturate that canal. And you be the judge of how easy or difficult it is. So there's the warm obturation tip that we have. I'm placing it inside the canal over here. I'm counting 5,000, 6,000, 7,000. That's it. That's the key. On the right side, you see the view through my microscope. Believe it or not, we'll go back to the slides. Believe it or not, the only catch that there is in this case was, can you put that in there within 7 seconds approximately? It sounds so simple. That's all it takes. I'll bring it to another example, another video of another case. And we'll go into this. And what you're seeing right now on your screen is the oven in this case. And I'll show you, by the way, the maxillary central. Let me show you the before and after. Remember that video I just showed you a moment ago where all I said is I'm counting 5,000, 6,000, 7,000. In other words, within 7 seconds, that tiny little obturator created this over here. And let me show you in this after. So as harmless as this thing looked, we probably thought, nah, straightforward canal. Just with the maxillary central incisor, look at how nicely within 7 seconds it filled this anomaly over here. Look at how nicely it filled this apical delta with sealer puffs. There's no way anyone can say, well, it was too quick, it was too easy. No, it can't be. There's a catch. It's not good. No one can argue that we did not fill this canal system, not just the main canal, but the canal system completely, including lateral canals, apical delta, and all these little anomalies, and within 7 seconds. I'm not trying to sound silly and almost like I'm trying to sell you cars after, with an infomercial at night, but that really is the case. That was a very straightforward case. Well, let me show you another case over here. I'll show you this lower first molar. There's the before, and there's the after, and let me show you how we got to this. Okay, so no one's going to say when you look at this obturation, well, Minoru, you know what? You kind of cut corners. You instrument it to a tiny size at the apex. It's not filled well. There's a lateral canal, by the way, right there. No, there's got to be a cat. So let me show you this case, and let me show you down here in the lower left image just what we've been able to accomplish. Look at how nicely I've obturated the two mesial canals, the distal, and even an isthmus right there that's between the two mesial canals. So here's the video of this lower molar case. And you'll see first over here, and these are synchronized views. The top is the extraoral view, and the bottom is the view through my microscope. There's the obturator, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000. That's it. We're done. Period. No gimmicks, no silliness. That's it. 7 seconds. The only catch here is if you place it in 4 seconds, it won't flow as well. If you place it in 30 seconds, obviously it won't flow well because it's going to start cooling off. We're all doctors here. We went to university long enough that I'm sure we can all count from 0 to 7 in no time, and it should not be rocket science, but that's what it takes. So it sort of leads me to my next point. What's the catch? And I'm not trying to sound silly, and I'm not trying to sound like it's a gimmick, but literally here's the catch. If you can insert a paper point into the canals without touching the walls of your endo axis, and if you can do that in the 7 seconds I've mentioned to you, then you can do this. And let me show you this video. This is something you and I see every day. Here's a lower molar that's been instrumented. Now we're ready to dry the canals, and I'm putting this paper point in each canal. Now notice when you're putting in your paper points to dry the canals, you don't go in there and you touch the floor and you buckle it, and then you got to go into another one and you buckle it and we try another one. The reality is you can put it in there just like I'm showing you with absolute ease and without having to touch the walls of this axis. That's all it takes. I kid you not. Now imagine this paper point that I'm putting in there is a worm gutta percha. No different. It just happens to be a nicely engineered paper point. So that's point number one. And we'll show you this. Let me see if he'll show you this video over here.
Actually, Dr. Haas, these are the videos we just showed, and I wanted to ask if you would maybe click on a few of the questions in the Q&A pod. There's been a few coming in, just to see if some you could address real quickly, maybe.
Let me.
I think if you click on them, it'll expand them, so you can see what the.
I can't thank you enough for you guys participating. It's really, I'm used to lecturing in front of a live audience where they raise their hand, so it's really exciting to be able to do it this way. Let me just try and flee. There's a lot of questions here.
Yeah, and you'll need to repeat them because they can't see. The crowd can't see the question, so if you'll repeat it and then address it would be great.
Okay, so one good question that someone was asking, and I'll just mention the first name. This is Todd. How should gutta core be inserted into the oven? That is, well, we'll show you. Let me see if I can show you over here with the marker. Here's the oven. Great question. Very simple in that what you want is to have it hanging off the plastic handle, not the rubber stopper. I often see people where they try and hang it off the rubber stopper, but no, you actually want it to hang off the plastic handle. So in this case, imagine it's the black one, and you'll see a little bit better in the videos that I'll show you. So that's a great question over there. I'll try and sort of move along, but it was a good question at this point. So in terms of that's catch number one, where quite simply you just have to put in that warm obturator inside the canal without touching the walls, which is exactly what you do for paper points. So this is nothing new for us. Catch number two, as simple as it might sound, is, and I'm not trying to sound silly, so pardon me for that, but can you match the color of your obturator with your file? So let's say, I happen to use this red wave 1, which is called a primary wave 1 file. Well, guess what color obturator I would have to use? This is not rocket science, and I love it when things are simplified. And all I have to use is, well, the corresponding red obturator. If I happen to use the large one, the black one, well, I would just use the black one. If I happen to be using another file, let's say the black, for simplicity's sake, Pro-Taper Gold or whatnot, that's fine. I would just use the black gutta core. So it's very, very simple. So those are the two catches. Believe it or not, those are the only two catches that there is to this. And so to me, that's one of the reasons why this warm obturation technique has become such a game changer, because over the years, Tulsa has really listened to the frustrations, including from people like myself who use plastic carrier-based obturators, such as thermophil, and had issues. So they said, no problem. This is, year 2014. We can do this. We can make it happen. And we came out with the following. So here's the sort of like the step-by-step in performing this. So first you want to go in there, you've instrumented the canal, you've dried it. What you want to use is you want to confirm your length, and you can use a size verifier file which comes with every pack, and you'll see if you have a pack of these obturators, it comes with a file inside, which is a full-fledged nickel titanium file, which you can sterilize and reuse. So you put in your file, you take your radiograph, and at the same time, then you want to go on towards is make sure that you want to place your sealer. So in terms of how much sealer to place in there, and we'll show you a video shortly, you place very little sealer. How much? Less than what you think. Let's put it that way. And then how long do you have in order to place the obturator from the orifice to the apex? Remember I said approximately 7 seconds. That's the catch. And you can see over here, actually a good question about how you place it. It's actually hanging off the handle, not the rubber stopper. And then I'll also show you in a video how to remove this carrier. So you've got this carrier over here. If you're a thermophil person, I know about a third of you are carrier-based obturator people from the poll that we did. If you're a plastic carrier-based obturator clinician, this is where it gets extremely frustrating, because how do you remove this plastic? Well, Guttacore took care of that issue. So let me show you these videos for this case. And the first one is about, well, how much sealer do I place in there? You'll see in this video less than what you think. So if you don't mind, yeah, there you see in this video over here, very little, maybe the last 3-4 millimeters of the paper point. You put it almost to working length, and essentially I'm just brushing or painting the walls of the canal. We'll go on to the next video, which is, so that's very, very, very simple. We'll go on to the next video, and what that video shows you is how it's critical to make sure that it takes about 7 seconds. So I'll count 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, and there I am at length. Okay, that's it, 7,000 seconds. If it's 6,000, 8,000, not the end of the world. I just want you to try and remember the 7,000. And Sergio Cutler, who's a phenomenal clinician, wonderful endodontist, he's got this brilliant idea of just saying count elephants. If that makes you count a little bit slower, 1 elephant, 2 elephants, 3 elephants, go ahead. And when you're doing this, in fact, when you're first doing this, performing this technique, I would even recommend that you have your assistant count with you. Now, your patient might start going, what's going on over here? How come you guys are counting out loud? But really, you do it once, you will remember this. And so it takes me to my next point, which is the frustration you'll see in this video on the bottom of how do you remove these carriers? Well, remember this over here. This pink thing is gutta percha. It's not plastic. Remember I said it's like ice and water? Well, the pink is the ice and the orange is the water. In other words, both are gutta percha. I personally like to use a spoon to do this, a sharp spoon excavator, so you don't have to go out there and buy any new instruments. You don't have to use a burr. In fact, I recommend you don't use a burr, but just let this gutta percha set for maybe about half a minute. Some people even blow some cold air at this. And then to remove the excess gutta percha, which is in here, is actually quite simple. What I do over here is just remove it with that spoon. Again, not rocket science whatsoever. When you're removing the excess gutta percha, what I recommend is just to apply very firm pressure laterally and apically. And if at this point some of the gutta percha comes out coronally, don't worry. The sealer hasn't set. Just press it back in there with the spoon, and you're done. That's it. You don't need pluggers or anything like that. In terms of cleaning the floor, I'll show you. I'll fast forward over here. Let me see if I can fast forward to, pardon me, how you can do it. To just clean at the very end, I lightly brush the pulp chamber right over here, as you can see, with a large round burr on a slow speed handpiece. I'm not removing dentin. I'm just cleaning the floor. And look at this obturation over here. We've got the isthmus even between the 2 mesial canals obturated. And also note that this is all gutta percha. There's no sealer in here. There's no it's not one of those techniques where there's a lot of sealer and a tiny little gutta percha point. Thank you, John. We'll go back. But one of the things I love about this, it is entirely gutta percha. Tiny, tiny, tiny bit of sealer that's in there. You notice how little sealer I used to paint the walls. So that's sort of like the step-by-step. So again, here's the before, Here's the after of a simple case. Imagine what you might find with molars, premolars, if you find this with incisors, and here's the molar. Now,
Dr. Haas, hey, could I interrupt one more time? There are
please, please.
there's a ton of great questions. Would you mind poking through a few more of those? I would, with the people
Absolutely.
playing with us, maybe peek at some of those. If you click them, they'll expand, and then share a couple of those with us. Maybe just a couple, and then we'll
Actually,
move on.
someone was asking, do you pre-coat canals with sealer? Absolutely. So how much sealer? Very, very little sealer. And let me see. Hang on. Yeah, we do have a heck of a lot of questions. How is gutta percha? Very good question. How is the gutta percha in this kept from extruding through the apex with the gutta core technique? Excellent question. First and foremost, as with any technique, any warm technique, you got to make sure you respect the apical constriction. You're not going to go in there with your master file and go out the apex and blow open your constriction. So if you respect the apical constriction, maybe you go out with a number 10 to recapitulate and get your working length. I see no reason why you would have any problem with this. In fact, one of the things I love about the gutta core versus the, let's say, the plastic carrier systems, and as an example, and I say with all due respect to Cybron and to Tulsa, with their plastic carrier-based obturators, the problem there is you've got a plastic, and no matter what, you're going to take that plastic and you're going to fit it into the canal no matter what to length, and whether you have room for anything or not, you're going to be shoving that to the apex, and you're going to be pushing out the apex, whatever gutta percha might be there. Gutta core, on the other hand, because it's all gutta percha, if you're applying too much pressure, if it meets resistance, if it converges with another canal apically, then any extra pressure is pushed back out coronally. That is phenomenal and very important, and that's a key reason why I find with gutta core there's much less extrusion apically than there is with the carrier-based obturation systems, or even, believe it or not, with the warm vertical obturations, because what if you're not that comfortable with it? What if you push that plugger into the canal just a little bit too much, and now you've extruded it? The way the gutta percha, the viscosity of it, the way it flows, the way it's engineered, too much pressure, and it extrudes coronally. And that gives me a lot of peace of mind. Now, if I get a little bit of sealer puff, not the end of the world. I'm okay with that. But that's a phenomenal question over there. So I'll try and go to a few more questions as we come along. That's a great question. So back to the step-by-step, if I may, the canal drying over here. So you've dried the canal, and keep in mind as you're doing this, consider it as being your dress rehearsal for this warm obturator. So that paper point that you're putting in there to dry it, imagine in your mind, it's not a gutta percha. It's a paper point. That's all it is. So back to the size verifiers. Remember I said once the canal is instrumented, it's dried, what you want to do now is you want to take the size verifier, and it's this little thing over here, okay? And it comes with the corresponding colors, okay? And the nice thing is it's a full-fledged nickel titanium file that comes with each one of these packs over here. So don't throw it out, reuse it. And by the way, on this little thing, if you look closely, maybe it's tough to see, on the internet, but there's little black notches on it. The first one is 18, then 19, then 20 millimeters, then 22. Tulsa, I have to say, is brilliant in doing this, where this is my ruler. Those little notches that you might see over there, there you go. You see those little black lines. So those notches represent the length, 18, 19, 20 millimeters, and the same notches are present on the gutta core. Okay, and that's what you use for your length. You don't use a ruler. So back to our little slide over here, what I want you to make sure you realize is that as you're putting the size verifier in there and you're taking a radiograph to confirm your length, you also want to put it in there and bring it out of the canal and have the tip of the file completely clear of dentinal debris. You want these flutes completely clean, because if there are any dentin debris here at the very bottom, as you see with the green arrow, then it'll prevent you from being able to fill to length. And in fact, in the poll that I asked Tulsa to list before the webinar started, one of the main issues that people have had was spending too much time with their obturations, and the other one is not being able to fill to length. This is one of the reasons why it happens, because you don't clear the apical third of the canal, you have dentin debris in there, and that dentin debris will stop the obturation from going to length. So imagine we've gone there, we've dried the canals, we put this thing in there, the size verifier. It comes out, the tip of the size verifier, the very tip of it is all clear of any dent and debris, and we're good to obturate. What it means to me is that now you've got a clear path all the way from the coronal part all the way to the apex to be able to obturate to length. So now we're ready to obturate. Pardon me, now we're ready to put a sealer. How much sealer do you put? You put less than what you think, and it's just the last few millimeters of the sealer, of the paper point that we're going to put sealer on. And we showed you that in the video before. So again, from this pre-op to this post-op, okay, where you get this little bit of sealer out the apex, but look at how nicely the rest is filled. How do you do this? Well, let me show you this videos, okay? And we'll start off with this one over here. So let's dry the canals. And again, this to me is a dress rehearsal for you placing your gutta core in there. So within 7 seconds, I want you to take that paper point and just place it inside without touching the walls, which I know you do. I know everyone does. But this is a dress rehearsal for your obturation. We'll go on to our next video over here. And let me show you, oh, pardon me, actually, no, we'll go back to this video if you don't mind, John, to the original one. And what you can see over here is as I'm taking, thank you, the size verifier out, see how the flutes are completely clear of dent and debris. So you just use this as if it's a regular nickel titanium hand file. And now we're going to go on to the sealer placement. How much sealer do you put in there? Less than what you think. You just want to put some at the very tip. You're going to coat these walls with sealer, go almost to working length. You can also use a file if you want to. I just like to keep things simple, just paper points, coat the walls. And again, I want to obturate with gutta percha. I don't want to obturate with sealer. So we'll go on to our next slide over here. And in cases where, let's say we're obturating multiple canals, what I like to do is place paper points within the canals I'm not obturating. And there's one paper point there, there's another one that we just removed. Let me see if I can show you that again. So as soon as I take out that paper point, then right away there I have a nice clear path to obturate that canal with nothing in the way. The next canal I would obturate with this one. So it's sweet and simple. Now what we'll do, John, is we'll go on to back to our slides, please. So that's a tip that I have. That's in case you're worried that you may have sealer going over or overflowing to the other canals, let's say in molars. And so I like to use paper points that I cut at the orifice, and we'll go back to our slides over here. And it's a tip that I've just used myself over time. And let me see, while we're waiting for...
Doctor, did you want to do the video at the top? That was the synced one? I don't think we looked at that one yet.
Yes, thank you. See, there's a reason why John's here. Thank you very much, John. So the video on the top here, you'll see quite simply how we're delivering the warm obturator into the prepared canal. So there's the oven on the top. We placed it hanging off the black handle, and this is for this lower molar over here. In a moment, you'll see the lower video in sync with the upper one. The lower one is the view through the microscope, which is exactly what I see. So we take it out. We grab it by the handle with one hand, grab it with a cotton plier in the other at the working length that you want. And this is me. I just break off the handle. Now it's a nice, simple, easy obturation. And how many seconds do you have to place it in there? Roughly 7. So a surgical cutler would say 2,000, 2 elephants, 3 elephants, 4 elephants, 5 elephants, 6 elephants, 7 elephants. That's it. We're done. Fully obturated canal. And how do you remove it? Well, we just use a spoon excavator, a nice sharp spoon excavator. That's really all that is needed. And so we'll go back to our slides and sort of move things along. And it brings me to the following, which are little tips that I've learned personally from using this technique. And it includes the following. One is, as I showed you in the video, break off the handle and only use cotton pliers. If I'll show you in this video over here, keep in mind, here's a paper point, okay? Do you use this, do you grab your paper points with your finger, or do we grab our paper points with a cotton plier? Which one is easier? Do we put this paper point in there with our fingers, or like this? Which one gives us more tactile? If I use this obturator, is it easier with these big fat fingers of mine, or just with me doing this? Okay, so you be the judge. To me, it's pretty simple. So the other thing is also the rubber stopper that's on these gutta cores. once you get comfortable with this, the less you have on that gutter core, I find the easier it is. I would remove the rubber stopper. That's just me. So here you see an example. There's the rubber stopper, which you could use just as you do any rubber stopper on a file. You can cut that off, remove it, and what I like to do is actually just remove it, and I use these little markers over here, these little notches, 18, 19, 20 millimeters, 22, 24, no different than what we have on our files that I just showed you. And to me, that's my ruler. You do not use a ruler to measure your length over here. Do not use a ruler. Use these markers. That's the true length. That's meant to be there for a reason. And then to block out other canals, I mentioned earlier, you can place these paper points in the other canal. So if we're obturating this canal over here, I'll use paper points that I cut off at the orifice or at the occlusal table. And it'll bring me to these videos over here, which is exactly what I talked about. So here in the top, you'll see me removing the rubber stopper. Again, this is optional. You don't have to do it. I just find this a lot easier. There's one more visual obstruction in the way. So you can remove that. And now what I want you to do is look at these little markers over here on these. That's 18, 19, 20 millimeters. If my canal is instrumented to 20 millimeters, I'm going to use the third marker, 18, 19, 20. And my cotton pliers are going to grab it right over here just above the 20 millimeter mark. Now we'll move on to the other slide. And this is to remove the handle. So grab this gutter core with one hand, grab it with the cotton pliers, and there you go. I just broke this thing off. Again, now what's easier, having a big fat handle on the other end of this gutta percha, or an ejectable gun, or just carrying that little thing? And then once you're done obturating one canal, then what I recommend is, if you have multiple canals to obturate, then place paper points in the other canals. Once you're done obturating one, you remove the paper point from the other. But here I am just placing these paper points in the canals, and notice how you don't see it at the occlusal table. So I like to do it just below the occlusal table, and this will block out any of the canals from any gutta percha that maybe will overflow from this canal over to that. Although I got to hand it to, thank you, John. So I got to hand it to Tulsa because that is even less of an issue nowadays, because there's even less gutta percha to overflow in these canals with the newest generation of gutta core. So thank you, Tulsa, for listening to our comments and clinical suggestions, and actually continuously improving this product. So it brings me to one of my last points, which is misconceptions about gutta core. So we're almost done here. I'm not going to keep it for too much long, and then we'll get to the Q&A. So the first point is gutta core can't be retreated easily. Couldn't be further from the truth. Another thing that I hear sometimes that frustrates me personally is you can't obturate curved canals. And then the other thing is post-space preparation, which is very difficult with gutta core. It's gutta percha. It should be very easy to make post-space preparations, and I'll show you with videos how easy it is. And then technically some would say, well, it's more difficult than the worm obturation with the gun, and you need also more of a setup and more armamentarium than you would with the traditional technique. Well, let's go and answer this. And by the way, the reason why going back to this, the reason why I personally want to include this so much is because I get very frustrated when I hear people commenting on gutta core, and then I ask them, well, have you ever used it? And I'll bet my money that they have not used it, and yet they're very opinionated on it, including some of my colleagues, with all due respect. So if you ask someone for an opinion on gutta core, please also ask them, have you used gutta core? And if they've also used thermophil or any plastic carrier-based obturation, even better, because then they have an even better opinion. But unless they have they've used it clinically, with all due respect, I don't care to hear that opinion of theirs. So I'll just like to cover some of these misconceptions. Imagine you want to obturate this curvature over here, which I obturated, okay? Now, it's going to be exceptionally difficult to go this far down the canal and get your warm stainless steel obturation tip, that hot tip, to go this far, make a contact with the remaining apical gutta percha, and then backfill it. This is where you're very likely to have voids and whatnot. But with gutta core, it's not an issue. It's all gutta percha. Okay. The next point is it's more difficult to obturate curved canals. I should say, because of the tips of these stainless steel instruments. Here with this gun, with this hot tip, and even if you use, as you see over here, these nickel titanium pluggers, they're still going to have a hard time going all the way beyond a curvature. And that's where you're going to have very likely these voids that you see in this radiograph. The next misconception is that post-space preparations are very difficult. For those of you, for the third of you in this webinar, and it's a lot of you, that are using warm vertical obturation, you'll say, oh yes, but I can make post-spaces very easily. Well, wait till you use gutta core. Remember, it's all gutta percha. So if you can make a post-space in a gutta percha obturation, you can do it in gutta core also. So I'll show you a video shortly of how easy it was to make this post preparation in this maxillary canine. So some would say, well, it's more technically difficult. Remember this this animation I showed you of the 15 simplified steps? And this is not easy. I will put my money on it. When I give a course, or people have taken this course, some would say, oh, but I've been doing this for years and years. Well, okay, if you have me as an endodontist do MODs day in and day out and day out, sure, I can do it very easily. Practice makes perfect. But I don't expect you guys to do 1,000,000 endos in a day. And even if you do, it's still way more technically difficult than what gutta core is. So it's very easy to get these voids and these plugger tracks and whatnot. And the other issue is that gutta core needs actually less of a setup than what you see over here. Let me show you, with what I'm holding in my hand, all you need, believe it or not, for gutta core is the following. You're going to have your obturator over here. Okay, and there's your obturator, which by the way comes already. If you want to pan into my mugshot over here, John, I'll show you. You have this gutta core over here, and then you have this nickel titanium that comes in the kit. Aside from this and the oven that you're going to use over and over and over again, all you really need is cotton pliers, and I'm pretty sure everyone has this in their office, so you don't need to buy anything new. And then the other thing is you need a spoon excavator to remove any of the excess gutta percha. Again, this spoon excavator is what you would use for caries removal. So again, I don't think you need to buy any of this for your obturation, which is really nice. So the setup is very, very, very small, and it'll take us to these videos. Some would say you can't really retreat these. Well, in this case, you'll see in this video. Imagine you put your obturator, for whatever reason it didn't go well. All you have to do in this case is, what I recommend is I take a headstrom and I turn it clockwise. I just engage a little bit of the gutta core, pull that thing out, and I'll show you in a moment what I just took out. This is all gutta percha, okay? You'll see there's the core in the middle, the pink, and the worm gutta percha on the outside, all of it removed in one shot. And the sealer hasn't set. Now, if let's say the sealer has set and you want to retreat it, well, if you can retreat gutta percha, you can retreat this. So it is a non-issue. Next, I'll show you how easy it is to make post-space preparations. You do not need to buy post-space drills. In this case, I'm going to be using a piezo reamer. If you want to use a post-space drill, be my guest. It is all gutta percha, so go right ahead and make your post-space preparation as you wish. Here's the maxillary canine that I'll show you. How easy it is to make that post space in there. It's essentially, as far as I'm concerned, it is a no-brainer. You may have to wait maybe half a minute to a minute just to let the gutta percha seal fully. I find you rarely ever need to wait longer than that. And there we go. We have our post space prepared. And go back to our slide. We're on Q&A very, very shortly. Very, very easy to perform this. So very quickly, our order is the same. Absolutely not. With these two systems over here, they're very different. They're based obturators. I don't care what manufacturer makes base carrier retreat. They're more difficult to prepare post preparations. In fact, now you have post-space drills for this. Way more difficult to access posteriors. Premolars and molars become. Some people with thermostat, and I may be bending off plastic, and you want to look for a more different. Be my guest. There's no reason your 2000 things have been engineered so nicely. This thing again, and if you want to pan in there. It's all warm, and what I do, break. Now, isn't it easier to obturate this, any of the guns or anything else that you might have? That's to break that off while still all gutta percha base carrier. Brilliant. So remember it in the beginning. One of my opening slides was ethics, and this is, I'm not trying to patronize me sincerely saying this. Thanks to this, we can perform root canals in the year 20 steps. It is much more simple, predictable, and the outcome is way better. So no one is going to compare your obturations didn't look right. I don't think anyone's going to argue that fully obturated the entire canal system with this thing. If it took me only 7 seconds to do it, sorry, if you want to get coffee and be my guest, but that's endodont 14. And remember, like I said, if you're obturating, doing your endo the way you did more than 2 years ago, you're kind of behind. So being able to break off these handles is something that makes it easier nowadays, especially in these posteriors. So I thank you so much for your time. I'm here. My little guys are tired themselves, but what I'd like to do is go on to some of the. I thank you for hanging. So,
let me just make a
yes,
couple
John.
quick technical points. Been outstanding, obviously, and there's tons, so I appreciate it. I want to give you time to get through each of those. You may need kind of to the top. I think we've skipped over. Click on each if you don't mind. So we try to address. They're still coming in, which is great. For those who may not have questions unanswered or to get off for any reason, I've brought the quiz pod back. Wants to grab that. If you click on that quiz in the file share pod and down, help us with sending that quiz and the evaluation back in. We really appreciate things here. I'd say maybe don't click on the meeting's over because it'll actually open a browser immediately. But those are some share time technical videos, more on-demand and free webinars for you to consider, and also our live course calendar. This is a big part of all of our education. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Haas to go ahead and deal with Q&A. I know he's going to stay on as long as it goes on, but those that may not, thank you very, very much for attending.
Thank you very much, John. We literally have people from all the world. I saw the Canada, America, Europe. Gotta love technology. So thank you for possible, John. And so some really good questions. Noel touched the access walls. When you're putting in your, believe it or not, if you just barely nick the access, it's really not the end. So I would still go ahead and to obturate knife. Let's see, then, and I wouldn't even bother going into the canal. I would just, but this will be an issue more the first 1 or 2 times. You'll just handle it like it is a paper point. Nothing more you do. Someone else was asking.
That for yourself. Okay.
Someone else was asking. What if you use Eduard was asking. Would
track of answers, by checking them that day, right? I'm gonna point you to a couple. I'm gonna point you to a couple, Doctor. Way up top, it may be that I checkmarked one that hasn't been answered. There's one by Rashik, I believe it is, about an air bubble, about the third question down. Do you see that? And I hope I said his name right. I think, doctor, if you'll look for the ones that are unchecked, that'll be the ones that we probably still need to try to look at. Yeah.
Would have been. Also, someone was, do I use 100% with the lecture, but I use 50, 100%, and patients start wondering, what's this? Are you using bleach? You get these weird questions. Use 50% strength into that whole, and good question from Steve. The bladder core uses what setting on 3 in the heating unit? Most of the Obturation black, you can use setting number 1. As long as you have the, I personally don't recommend the oven. Let's say if you have thermofield gutter core, you want to get this new generation of ovens. For the smaller size or medium, I use setting 1. Sometimes for a larger size, I use setting number 2. But I've never found myself using setting number 3, unless you're using a massive gutter core, again, in that huge central incisor, you're going up to 80 or so. A good question from Wilson. What happens if you meet resistance when inserting the gutter core as you keep pushing it apically? You might remember in the beginning of the presentation, I said one of my favorite things about gutter core is the fact that if you do place too much pressure, because it's all gutta percha, instead of the plastic carriers, where as you're going to make that you're going to shove that plastic carrier in there, you're going to make that thing fit, and you're going to take up that space no matter what, and then be more likely to extrude stuff out the apex. With gutter core, the way it flows, if there's too much resistance, it'll just fill coronally. So in other words, let's say if you have a canal that merges apically. You filled one canal, and now this one needs to go in there. Well, it's going to meet resistance right over here at this point, and it's not going to go further. A plastic carrier may have gone further, and now you're pushing stuff out the apex. Gutter core, when it meets resistance, even though you keep pressing apically, it's going to extrude it coronally, which is brilliant because now you have less, a much reduced chance of extrusions and all those sort of unwanted sort of accidents. Someone was asking a question, what's the problem with voids and plugger tracks? Okay, then I'm not sure if you're being sarcastic with that or not. Well, you want to fill the canal system. There are studies showing that the biggest reasons for root canal failures is in fact incomplete obturations, having voids. And there are studies on this. So you want to seal the complete root canal system, not just the canal. You want to seal the canal system. And so aside from voids not looking good, and someone one day down the road saying, who the heck obturated this thing and having an issue with it, you want to have a complete fill of the canal system. So thank you for asking that question. And Tyler was, I just opened Tyler's question. How do you manage canals that join together apically? So I think I just answered that one. Another question he had was, how do you manage canals that are that have a sort of like a figure 8 configuration? And so in a case like that, what you do, and I only have so much time tonight, but if you have a figure 8 obturation or an ovoid even, what I personally like to do is I use, again, for argument's sake, let's say I use a red wave 1 and I use that in that ovoid canal and I go back and forth and brush the walls. On one side of the canal, I'm going to use a master corresponding cold paper point that corresponds to that wave 1. So I'll put that, let's say, on one side of the canal for argument's sake. It's going to go on this side, excuse me, and then on the other side where I'm left with that space, I'm going to put my red corresponding gutta core and fill the empty half of that ovoid canal with that gutta core. And that will flow into that space and around the cold coin beautifully. In fact, for many of these questions that you have, that specific point I actually have in the chairtime.com that Tulsa has, where I actually have a link, like a 1-minute segment about how do you fill ovoid canals. So thank you for that. And then anything I may have covered or you may have missed, feel free to go even, I'm not trying to put a plug for me because you might be sick of this face by now, but you can go on Tulsa's website on chairtime.com or just Google, Dr. Manor Haas and gutta core obturation, and whether it's on YouTube or on the Tulsa website, you'll see 2 or 3 minute clips of many of the questions that have been asked. Sorry, someone was asking. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, and again, I'm not trying to put a plug for that, but you might be in the middle of obturating, or you might have a patient and 5 minutes before and during your day, you might not be sure about something. No joke. You go on your smartphone, you go on your computer in your office. It takes 2 minutes for most of these, and you'd be amazed how easy it is to see all these points I've mentioned on their chairtime.com website. There's another person that was asking, are the color-coded gutta cores used also for corresponding ProTaper next files, wave 1? Absolutely. You could use them on ProTaper Universal, ProTaper Next, ProTaper Gold, gutta cores, wave 1. They're all color-coded. So it doesn't mean it's only for yellow, red, or black. They have other sizes, green, you name it. Let me see another question over here. Oh yeah, so there's Muhammad was asking, do the colors of the ProTaper Universal match the ProTaper Gold? This is 2014. Remember, I love it when things are simplified. Tulsa has done that. One of my 2 catches was, can you color match these things? So absolutely, whether you're using ProTaper Gold or Universal, those colors will match the corresponding gutta core. It's sweet and simple. You don't need complications in your life. And let me see. I think. Let me see if there's any more. Pardon me. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Let me find his again. Oh. Oh, maybe if you can read it. Yes. So divergent canal is a little bit different. If we're talking about, let's say, immature apices, and we're talking about canals which they don't converge apically, but they open apically, well, that's a whole other ball game. I'm on staff at a teaching hospital, at a children's teaching hospital. I treat very complicated pediatric cases. That is the one exception where I would say you may not want to use warm obturation because you have less control of it apically. You don't want this thing to extrude. That's where it's a whole other lecture. If ever you see me lecture one day, I'll tell you about it. But That's where I would even use MTA, and thank goodness for MTA nowadays. So I don't recommend that for those sort of odd cases. Let me see if there's, sorry, hang on. Um, and, oh, there, sorry. Yeah, so thank you. So Derek was asking, can you use Gutter Core with the twisted file adaptive filing system? Um, Great question. These things are meant to correspond with one another. You might be able to. You would need to use your. I would recommend you use your O6 taper files, and then it might correspond to it. You may have to go maybe one size smaller. I think you might be okay there, but it's really designed to work seamlessly when you're using corresponding files and Obturators. I'm an iPhone guy and I'm a Mac guy. Well, it's meant to interact perfectly. I don't need complications in my life. If Obturation is an issue for me, I want to use the corresponding Obturation. But again, having said that, I've used Twisted File Adaptive. I don't use it anymore. But if you use a Twisted File Adaptive, I would recommend you use the larger size, maybe downsize the Gutter Core. But you see, when I start giving answers with maybe and I think and probably, I'm not that comfortable. Do you want to experiment when it's, with all due respect, your mom or your dad or your brother and sister in a chair? Do you want someone saying, well, I think, or maybe, probably, or we should do, so, it's one of those things. If you're a twisted file adaptive person, then, something like a Wave 1, which is also reciprocating, but even more efficient and simplified, is something that I'm sure you'll appreciate. But thank you for that question. So I hope I've answered it. It probably will work, but I can't say definitively. Someone was asking, can I use a Pro GT oven? You probably can. I'm not sure exactly what setting, but it's a one-time expense. I don't make any money off the sale of these ovens. I wish I did. I'd be in Hawaii right now if I did. But I do recommend this new generation of ovens. It's really meant to work with this system seamlessly. So it's something I would recommend to do it properly, to have it warmed up properly. That's what I would recommend. And let me see. I think, yeah. Well, thank you. Well, if I may, thank you.
Or comments about the presentation tonight in the Q&A pod, feel free to. I'd love to show our folks here how much you enjoyed it. And again, please remember to do your quiz and eval forms for us as well. It means a lot to us. So Dr. Haas, I'll let you wrap us up. Just so everyone knows, I'll leave the room open even as Dr. Haas wraps up. So if you need to download things or whatever, feel free to. I won't shut down for another 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Thanks,
No,
Dr.
thank
Haas.
you very much, John, and Tulsa and everyone. This is brilliant. Here we are, and Monday evening, and we have people from around the world. Really, thank you very much to all of you. If you have any questions, I know John will give a link for that somehow could reach me with any questions. You're more than welcome to. So from the poll that I saw earlier, a lot of you had issues with being unable to fill to length, being unable to, or spending too much time under obturation, unpredictable outcome. I hope I've answered those issues that you've had by showing you this system, which is an absolutely brilliant system. And so thank you very much to all of you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Tulsa. Mindy also in the background. And I wish you guys a great night from all over the world, and all the best to you guys from Toronto, Canada. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. And as I said, I'll leave the room open for a while. I'm actually about to put Dr. Haas's email, since he offered it, into the Q&A pod, so it'll pop up here in a second for you all if you want to send him anything. But as I said, we're going to allow you and Dr. Haas to log off if you wish. I will keep the room open for another 5 minutes if you need to grab anything. And thanks, everyone. Good evening, and we'll let you know about the next events. Appreciate it.
Thank you.